Good morning or afternoon, depending where you are. Welcome to today's webinar, Metrics That Matter, Data Strategies for Indoor and Greenhouse Cultivation. I'm Noelle Skadinsky with Cannabis Business Times. In today's event, experts from Pipp Horticulture and GGS Greenhouse Structures are going to be breaking down key performance indicators, or KPIs, as most of us know them as, that drive efficiency, yield, and profitability. Many of you are likely already tracking and using data, but today we are going to go beyond the basics and explore next generation KPIs that truly move the needle in modern cannabis cultivation and can help you improve quality, reduce costs, maximize yield, and gain a competitive edge. I first want to thank Pipp Horticulture for making this webinar possible. Pipp is the industry-leading provider of mobile vertical grow solutions with installations in over 3,000 grow rooms worldwide. With more than 40 years of experience, Pipp has engineered a variety of cost-effective solutions that enable you to exponentially grow your production without increasing your square footprint. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping notes. We will be leaving time at the end of the webinar for you, for our speakers to answer as many questions as they can. You can submit questions at any time during the webinar. You should see a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. It has a little question mark in it. If you could please submit your questions using that button instead of in the chat to make sure that our speakers see them all in one place. Our speakers also will be creating a blog post following the webinar to answer questions that they weren't able to get to, and they'll also include questions that they were able to answer, and they'll be emailing that out to all attendees at some point in the near future following the event. You're going to see two super brief polls pop up during the webinar. If you could please just take a quick second to answer those, we would greatly appreciate that. And we will be recording this webinar, so if you absolutely have to leave at any time, not that you're going to want to, it will be recorded, and we'll send a link to all of the registrants probably within about a week, if not sooner. Lastly, just a quick little known fact that I really hope is not going to be relevant to today's webinar, but today is National Dog Rescue Day. I mention this because I have two very large rescue dogs, and as our speakers today know, they almost never bark when I'm on virtual calls, but for some reason, whenever Michael and Anders, and this last time Bryce, are on a webinar prep call, my dogs bark. I think it's personally because they're very excited to learn about all of the cultivation expertise that our speakers have. So happy National Dog Rescue Day to all of you who have them. And I will be celebrating, especially if we get through this webinar without hearing from my boys. With that, I am pleased to introduce our speakers today. Michael Williamson, as Director of Cultivation, Michael fuses his 14 years of commercial cannabis ownership and operational excellence to provide support and strategy for Pipp's engineering and sales teams and client operators. Michael co-founded Greenhouse Industries in 2013, now a division of Pipp Horticulture, and he is an early pioneer in vertical farming. Anders Peterson is a seasoned professional with over a decade of experience in the cannabis industry. He is armed with a degree in cellular and molecular biology, and he has emerged as a leader in indoor cultivation facility design and operation. Anders' expertise lies in integrating cutting-edge technology, data analytics, and precision agriculture techniques to optimize plant performance and product quality. As the Director of Horticulture at Pipp, Anders collaborates directly with growers, owners, and construction professionals, and has contributed to the designs of over 200 indoor cultivation facilities. Last but not least, we're pleased to welcome Bryce Danbrook. He is a seasoned professional with over 15 years of experience in the horticulture and cannabis industry. And as cultivation solutions specialist at GGS Greenhouse Structures, Bryce has dedicated the past decade to driving innovation and efficiency in greenhouse systems. With a passion for CEA and urban farming, Bryce brings a deep understanding of optimized and sustainable cultivation techniques, facility design, and vertical farming systems. His commitment to innovation and strategic problem solving continues to shape the future of indoor and greenhouse farming. I am now pleased to turn things over to Michael Williamson. Michael, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Noelle, and thank you, Cannabis Business Times, for hosting us today. And most importantly, I want to say thank you to everyone who is attending and who will be listening to this later for taking time out of your day to be with us today. So, all right, well, let's go to the learning objective slide and kind of set the tone here. So today we're going to be identifying the most important key performance indicators, or KPIs, that drive yield, efficiency, and profitability. We're also going to be exploring lesser known and high impact KPIs that influence top level metrics. We'll be comparing indoor, kind of represented by Anders today, and greenhouse grower perspectives represented by Bryce, and challenges, and understand the critical role of data in improving product quality and business outcomes. We're also going to be emphasizing why CEA, or controlled environment agriculture operators, must know their numbers to remain competitive and scalable. I'm also going to trigger the first poll question. It's going to ask a little bit about who you are. We want to kind of get a sense of who's listening so that we can tailor our audience and our dialogue a bit more to our audience. So if you can take a moment to click on that button, that would be wonderful. All right, and then we're going to go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about next level KPIs, but we can't do that without setting a foundation with some of the basics. And so I'll be discussing some of these business metrics that drive better decision making. Now, these are going to be KPIs that tie directly to financial performance, operational efficiency, and help leaders forecast, scale, and control costs with more confidence. The first one is the obvious one here. We're going to say yield per square foot or square meter, depending on where you're operating. All right, so real quick, it looks like we got about 14% greenhouse, 58% indoor, and we have in a greenhouse and indoor at 30%. So we got a nice mix here today. Awesome. All right, so let's start with the yield per square foot or square meter, and this is going to be your core efficiency metric. This links directly to revenue potential. And now everybody measures this one a little bit differently, and that's something to be aware of. So just remember, not everyone defines this metric the same. Some people refer to something as UPM, or usable plant material, which isn't always the same as grams per square foot. So standardization is key when comparing across multiple facilities or having dialogues with other farmers. You want to get that out of the way and really understand, well, how do you define this metric? At Pipp and GGS, we're measuring how much sellable dried flower you get per square foot of canopy. So think A and B grade buds only, no trim, no C grade buds, popcorn, larf, no fan leaves. Now, when we talk about benchmarking and where you're at in the terms of performance, we consider pretty much anyone to be under 45 grams per square foot to be relatively low, with a lot of room left on the table. If you're in that 46 to 64 grams per square foot, we kind of consider that to be about average. 65 to 80 grams per square, we consider that to be great or good. And then over 80 and over 100 is excellent. Now, the next one that we're going to talk about is cost of goods sold, or your COGS per gram. This is your profitability pulse. It captures all direct costs to grow, harvest, and cure a gram of flower. Indoor goals, we're looking at about 60 to 90 cents per gram. We do see some top tier operators hit as low as 40 cents to 55 cents per gram. And those operators are typically vertically integrated. They usually have some level of scale, and they usually have some decent levels of automation. These are all things that you can control to some degree, depending on what your budget and your infrastructure looks like. Now, on the greenhouse side, this is going to be more of an efficient model because we're utilizing energy in a more efficient way. We're supplementing light, and we typically target between 35 cents and 60 cents a gram is a pretty solid place. And now, depending on if they have supplemental lighting upwards of 200 ppfd or greater, I'm sorry, 1200 combined, then they might have numbers that are closer in yield to indoor in some cases. Now, some of the key drivers here are going to be labor efficiency, yield optimization, minimizing waste and rework, and smart use of automations. This is one of the best ways to see if your operation is truly lean. If someone ever tells you that their cost of goods sold is a fixed number, you can almost assume that they do not know exactly what they're talking about. They should be giving you a range because depending on your crop, your cultivar, maybe seasonality in a greenhouse, you might have a range on your cost of goods sold. I've yet to meet a farm that's at fixed $400 cost of goods sold per pound, or 60 cents per gram. So the other one that's really important is harvest turnover rate. This one's relatively simple. It's how many full harvests you pull from each room per year. So in cannabis, in major production, we see that most people are somewhere between an 8 and 9 week maturation time. And so I'm just going to look at those two maturation times to get started. So a typical 8 week cycle will get you about 6.5 turns per year if you have a 24-hour turnaround time between when the last plant is harvested, then the room is cleaned, sanitized, and reset, and the next day the room gets loaded. On a 9 week flowering cycle, that's about 5.8 harvests per year. So what are some things that could slow down your harvest turnover rate? Bottlenecks in your drying space, scheduling delays, cleaning and reset times, a clogged veg pipeline, or an overworked crew. So improving your turnover rate by just half a cycle per year can move the needle on annual revenue in significant ways. A lot of times we meet facilities and I say, how long does it take to turn over your room? And they'll say, yeah, a week, maybe 5 days. Well, you just lost a half a harvest per year. And as certain states are consolidating, a half a harvest per year can be the difference between success and struggle. The next one is going to be inventory turnover rate. So how fast do you sell what you harvested? Now we measure this from a test pass inventory to final sale. And I would say excellent or fully optimized is about 30 days or less from when the plant was harvested. We see most people falling in between about 30 to 60 days as an average. Once you get over 60 days and 90 days, that's when we start to see degradation. We start to see maybe you have to put that product on sale. We see terpene degradation, maybe even bag appeal degradation. So this is one that, cannabis doesn't get better with time. So really managing and analyzing how fast you're moving inventory and managing how much you're producing is pretty critical. These KPIs don't live in isolation. The magic happens when you connect them back to labor, environment, SOPs, post-harvest processes, and it allows for you to kind of make more streamlined decisions. And you don't really, you don't need a full-time data analyst. So that's a really nice kind of person to have on your org chart. You can just get into the rhythm of reviewing these with your leadership team and turning these insights into action. So now that we've touched base on key business metrics that show how well an operation is performing, it's time to talk and link what is happening with the plants themselves. With that, I'll hand it over to my brother Anders to walk us through a core agronomic KPIs, the ones that directly impact plant health, consistency, and ultimately yield.
Thanks, Michael. And for those listening, we're not actually brothers, but we travel so much that it feels like it sometimes. We travel together a lot. Um, all right. So as cultivation matures and this industry matures, we're having to shift from gut feel decisions to evidence-based strategies driven by measurable plant health and environmental KPIs. I'm going to focus here on some of the indoor ones, and then after I go, Bryce will focus more on greenhouse KPIs. Now, these metrics help diagnose and improve crop performance, quality, and consistency. While there are limits to how much you can cut labor or material costs, as Michael was talking about, you can still improve competitiveness by improving yield through better plant science. So this is where you leverage plant science to make measurable impacts on your business. Sometimes the best way to reduce COGS is simply to grow more and grow better. All right, so some of these high impact plant health metrics that I like and I wanted to talk about today, one of them being photon conversion efficiency, abbreviated PCE. PCE measures how efficiently your plants convert light energy, photons, into biomass. It's one of the best indicators of production efficiency from a plant health perspective, especially in high density indoor environments. It's calculated as grams of dry flower produced per mole of light delivered to the canopy over the full crop cycle, including both your veg and flower phases. And I just want to say that once again, it's grams, your production, over basically how many photons your canopy has captured throughout your entire cycle. And since light is the main driving force of plant growth, that is why photon conversion efficiency is a great indicator of your production efficiency. Most of the industry, when we calculate this, averages around 0.2 grams per mole roughly, sometimes lower, sometimes higher. But we've seen strong performers hit 0.35 to 0.4 grams per mole with the right combination of lighting, genetics, environment, and cultural practices. Tracking this metric over time can help you evaluate improvements in your facility and highlight when performance is slipping, whether due to light degradation, environmental inconsistency, or plant health issues. The next one, probably one of my favorite metrics to track, is leaf surface temperature, LST. LST gives you direct insight into how the plant is responding to its environment, especially around transpiration and evaporative cooling. It's a great indicator of plant stress. In healthy, well-lit conditions, the leaf surface temperature should be 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than the ambient air temperature in LED grow rooms. It's a little bit different in HPS. And I refer to this difference as the leaf temperature offset. When that offset shrinks, or the leaf surface temperature equals or exceeds the ambient temperature, it usually means the plant is stressed, transpiration is limited, and photosynthesis is underperforming. This offset also affects your VPD calculations. If you only use air temperature and air relative humidity, you might be overestimating the plant's actual stress level. Factoring in the leaf surface temperature to your VPD calculations can lead to a more precise climate management strategy. So don't fool yourself on what VPD you think your canopy is getting. Factor in leaf surface temperature and get more accurate, especially in these high-performing indoor facilities. The next one is airflow velocity. And if you've ever heard me speak or do a podcast, I talk about airflow velocity quite a bit because it's the great equalizer and it's often underlooked. Inconsistent airflow creates microclimates, uneven drybacks, and irregular growth. Even when the air temperature and relative humidity are uniform, velocity at the canopy often isn't. So I recommend targeting between 100 to 200 feet per minute in veg and 150 to 300 feet per minute in flower, adjusting upward as light intensity increases to support the energy balance and transpiration. In fact, actually, Pipp is partnered with the Cannabis Research Coalition, Dr. Allison Justice, to study airflow velocity and its impacts on photosynthesis. So be tuned for that study. And lastly, real quickly, canopy utilization rate is an important one. It's one of the first things I look at when I go into a grow room. It's really about how uniformly and fully you're using the canopy. I'm checking for runts, uneven plant heights, gaps in coverage, and canopy depth or volume. So typically you're looking for between a 2.5 to 3 foot deep canopy. If you're not using under canopy lighting, it may be bigger if you're using under canopy lighting. But essentially, the more consistent canopy, the more yield per square foot. Okay, and with that, I want to pass it off to Bryce to go through some of the greenhouse agronomic KPIs.
Thanks, Anders. I wanted to start by saying that everything that Anders went through is still relevant in a greenhouse. My prerogative is to kind of shift perspective and how you might look at things slightly differently. Now, in a greenhouse, I always like to say, about a third of your battle is understanding what the optimal conditions are that your plants will grow under. Another third of it is knowing how to use the greenhouse as a tool and the equipment within the greenhouse to steer those climate conditions towards those needs. And then the last third is how to do all of the above in an efficient way. In any growing environment, the consistency of the climate is going to translate directly to the consistency of the crop performance. And similarly, the optimization of the climate is going to directly translate to optimization of the crop. Now, where you need to be careful is that optimization is not just about max yield. It's also about finding the most efficient path to get you there. And in pursuit of those efficiencies and optimizations, you always have to be careful and measure and weigh those against the energy and cost you need to put into that system to achieve those results. In a greenhouse, you might face slightly different challenges, such as the fluctuations of seasonal and daily temperatures and other climate conditions, light, humidity, and the energy demand to regulate those. There's greater pest exposure often. The labor can be spread thin due to the scale and layout of your facility. The biggest, it translates to variability or volatility in your COGS. So it's something you have to look at not just on a yearly basis, but throughout different times of year to get a true sense of what's going on in your facility at any given time. One other variable is there tends to be more diversity within the greenhouse world in terms of how things are designed, the tools and systems used within a greenhouse. Often, obviously, there's still diversity within the indoor model, but perhaps a little more exaggerated in the world of greenhouses. Now, getting back to the climate, and Anders mentioned VPD. I like to think of VPD as and temperature as the regulating forces or the driving forces in the rate of photosynthesis. So temperature regulates the metabolic rate. VPD regulates the transpiration rate, and both of those combined regulate the rate at which a plant can photosynthesize and harness the usable CO2, light, nutrient availability. Specifically, in terms of KPIs in a greenhouse, Anders mentioned DLI. In a greenhouse, you might look at it two slightly different ways. One being the natural versus supplemental DLI. This is essentially just weighing out what percentage of those moles per day are delivered naturally versus supplementally through supplemental lighting. That is also going to be used for making decisions throughout the year in terms of how much you want to push your crop, day lengths, etc., to ensure that you're maintaining profitability. Another real key theme, an example of a KPI is a weighted KPI. And in this case, a weighted DLI, I think, is an extremely useful tool to kind of take into account the fact that plants aren't equally active over a 12 or 24-hour period. There tend to be certain hours of the day where they're more active and therefore can utilize the ingredients that you're delivering to them more efficiently. So in terms of DLI, you may find that your crop is more active during the earlier hours of the day, and the efficiency or use of, they tend to taper off in their productivity towards the end of the day. So if you look at the chart here in the bottom left of this slide, you'll see a little example of a weighted DLI efficiency calculation. So you can see that the earlier hours of the day between 6 and 8 are weighted at a 1.2, indicating that the plants are more active at an earlier hours of the day. And similarly, the factor, the multiplier, it shrinks as you get later in the day. The idea is that you may find that at certain times of the day, it is more productive or you get a better value for the energy that you're spending on your crop. So you may want to focus when looking at total DLI, targeting the hours of the day that you're getting the most bang for your buck. Now, you don't want to necessarily stop at DLI. You can also look at other factors like CO2 efficiency. So a weighted CO2 efficiency would look very similar, where you want to align the aggressiveness to which you're trying to saturate your canopy with CO2 to the times where it's most useful to the plants, as well as when there's other ingredients that are going to allow the plants to utilize that CO2 most efficiently. So you might think of things like, when is my plant the most photosynthetically active? You'll also want to think of practical considerations like, at what times is it not efficient for me to supplement, like when I'm ventilating aggressively, or other conditions where the ingredients just aren't right for you to get the best bang or diminishing return, rather, out of enriching CO2. I'd also like to emphasize the importance of consistency in your climate. We get on this a little bit later on, but if you look at things like how it affects the VPD, for example, if in a greenhouse your temperature drops as you get close to a wall, that's going to affect your VPD. If your light levels drop towards the walls, you're going to have a microclimate where your plants, even though your sensors in the room may read good average conditions, it's not necessarily accounting for where your crop could be struggling and where those perimeter areas could be impeding your overall productivity. Some other quick KPIs dealing with stress factors. One blends with Anders mentioned leaf surface temperature. There's also a crop water stress index or other KPIs similar that try to give you an indicator on stress factors. Watering is such a lot of people overwatering, a lot of people underwatering. I mentioned this one because it's a common issue. And the difference being you're measuring the internal canopy conditions compared to the ambient temperatures rather than just leaf surface. Another really important one is pest pressure index, or sorry, pest pressure impact index. And essentially what you're doing is you're quantifying the degree to which the infestation is occurring, whether it's in area or in the pest threshold levels. You're factoring in the crop sensitivity, such as the stage of development, or if there's certain risk factors where this is more problematic for this stage. There's also the yield quality kind of penalty, where what is the pest threshold doing to the yield or the quality of my production. And then the other is laying that over the treatment methods or interventions that you're using to treat the problem. Now, boiling that all down, you can get a real good sense of your economic threshold, as when is that threshold of my cost to maintain the problem it equals out with the cost of the problem itself, or the degradation of quality and yield. And then the other is the economic injury level. At what point this is causing injury to the business and requires more aggressive interventions. So I think that wraps up what I would like to talk on agronomically. I think we'd move on to the facility and operations metrics. And I think Michael Williamson is going to start off.
Thanks, Bryce. All right, so facility operation metrics, driving profitability through labor and workflow optimization. Well, that all sounds really lovely, but what does that exactly mean? So facility operation KPIs focus on how work is being performed, not just what is being performed. These metrics identify inefficiencies and bottlenecks, promote consistency, and hopefully the goal is to get to predictable outcomes, enabling teams to do more with less, improving margins without compromising quality. All this stuff sounds really nice, right? One of the first metrics we'll be discussing is labor hours per pound of flower. So labor hours per pound of flower. As you can guess, total labor hours spent from propagation through post-harvest to produce 1 pound of sellable flower. You might have labor hours per kilo. Same thing applies here. Well, why is this metric so important? Labor is your biggest cost, and it can represent anywhere from 30% maybe in a lean facility and upwards to 50% in a less lean facility of your total cultivation cost. So figured this is, if you're going to focus on one, this is the best one to kind of start on. This metric highlights team productivity and SOP efficiency across the entire life cycle, enables an opportunity to shift from headcount-based to output-based planning. This is a key principle of lean farming or lean manufacturing. So most of us are probably familiar with headcount-based labor planning. This is a traditional approach that focuses on assigning a fixed number of employees to tasks or shift based on things like instinct, gut feel, assumptions, historical patterns, things like that. Now, it's regardless of the actual production needs. So a simple example would be we always have 3 people in the bedroom, or we schedule 10 trimmers for every harvest. The problem with those statements is it doesn't actually account for the variation in the workload, plant count, or task complexity, which can lead to overstaffing, underutilization, and/or bottlenecks in some cases. Now, when we look at output-based labor planning, this is more of a modern performance-driven method. It uses actual production metrics, things like number of plants, square footage of canopy, or pounds harvested, to forecast and schedule labor based on what needs to get done, not just who is available. I can't tell you, and I'm sure you guys can resonate with this comment, Anders and Bryce, how many times you hear like, oh, I'll throw some bodies at that. And, they're kind of like robbing Peter to pay Paul to try and get whatever they need to get accomplished that day. Well, that's usually results in poor planning and typically associated with headcount-based labor planning. So when you start to do data-driven decisions, you can actually plan accurately what your needs are. And you can also hold people accountable because you know that there is a cadence or a tempo that should be met that you've already proven out before. So some of the common root causes of high labor hours per pound or kilo are typically things like the obvious, right? Poor and inconsistent SOPs, lack of active management and oversight, manual tasks, maybe where automation might be a better fit, training gaps or labor misallocation. And of course, the opposite is going to be true for low labor hours per pound, which usually includes strong planning and team training, purpose-built workflows and facility layouts, streamlined and standardized processes. Some of the benchmarks here, and this might be something you may want to write down. An efficient operation will spend 15, some even maybe slightly less, but 15 to 25 labor hours per pound. Whereas an inefficient operation will spend anywhere between 26 to 36 plus labor hours per pound. This metric becomes especially powerful when broken down by department, by nursery, veg, flower, post-harvest, and it helps you to kind of micro isolate performance gaps. The other one I want to talk about is labor utilization rate. So by definition, this compares scheduled hours versus productive hands-on plants hours. And this is important because it exposes inefficiencies such as excessive meetings, idle time, or poor task allocation. This really helps managers mostly, I would say, reprioritize high value activities. So as an example, let's say an employee spends 70% of their time on meaningful plant-focused work. The other 30% may be an opportunity to improve. For example, maybe shorter meetings, less idle time, better supply prep, less hunting and searching for a tool somewhere in the facility. And, it doesn't seem like a big deal at times, but if you can just eliminate just 20 minutes of idle time per employee per day, you can literally recover hundreds of labor hours annually. So, my big takeaway here, you really can't improve what you don't measure. Operational KPIs help teams understand what is happening, why it's happening, and how to fix them, turning observations into something actionable. Now that we've connected some of the plant performances to agronomics, and I gotta say, I love being the dummy on this panel. It's a pleasure to sit in between Anders and Bryce here and just kind of learn so much all the time. But now that we've kind of have gone through some of that, let's kind of zoom out a little bit and let's look at the systems and the people that make it all happen. Facility operation metrics are where labor efficiency, environmental controls, and infrastructure all intersects. To walk us through that, especially from a greenhouse lens, I'm going to hand it over to my Canadian brother, who hopefully doesn't deny my brothership, Bryce, like Anders did.
Bryce, before I change slides, was there anything you wanted to touch on facility operations metrics before we move on to next one?
You're on mute.
Sorry about
There we
that.
go.
I think I do have some facility operations metrics. I mean, from a greenhouse perspective, I think it's more of a shift in focus in that a greenhouse is very seasonally regulated in terms of there are often practices, maintenances, or things that are either seasonal or weather permitting, such as changing your poly, if you have to seal up any vents or shut down any cool pad systems, if there are any areas that are disconnected and require traveling from one building to another, weather and seasonality can obviously impact that. The greater pest pressures of being in a greenhouse world demand, higher rates of scouting. Perhaps investing in preventative treatments like releasing bios or curating banker plants or indicator plants to help you stay ahead of these things. As well as we mentioned, labor tends to be spread a little more thin just due to the inherent layout of large-scale greenhouses. And one other key metric or KPI that I think is very valuable and isn't inherent to a greenhouse, but it's zone-specific task efficiency. So just again, going back to the layout of greenhouses often being larger and perhaps, especially if they're retrofitted, they may not have been designed by one mind's eye. It's just kind of things that were built over the years. There may be physical impediments to the productivity, whether that is like physical layout, it could be climate, microclimates where it's just hotter in these areas, the proximity to tools or resources to be able to accomplish tasks, or being out of sight, out of sight, out of mind. People can get away with a little more. So yeah, I think again, everything that Michael was mentioning is 100% relevant to a greenhouse, and it's just a kind of slightly different shift in perspective.
Okay. So with that, we're kind of getting to, we've talked about business metrics, agronomic and plant health metrics, and some operational metrics, but the infrastructure itself is quite important as well. And there are some KPIs and metrics associated with that have been quite impactful. And so I wanted to talk about the three that you're seeing on the right here. They really help drive facility reliability and consistent crop outcomes. I found them to be particularly useful to track. Firstly, equipment uptime percentage. This tells you how reliably your systems are operating. And it's calculated by your total runtime divided by the time that you had that equipment to be scheduled to run. In indoor cannabis, your equipment is like life support on a space station. You know, your plant's lives depend on these systems. So even a few hours out of spec can set a crop back. Target uptime should be 99% or higher. When you look at other industries, like other critical industries like data centers, for example, they have a goal and they track this. They shoot for what they call 5 nines or 99.999% uptime. And when you do the math, that's only 5 minutes of downtime per year. So while that may be tough to do in cannabis cultivation, it's a worthy benchmark to guide your facility design and maintenance planning. Will our cultivation facilities ever hit 5 nines? I'm not aware of any, but I think it's a really good target to try and strive for with your facility and your equipment uptime. And that kind of segues quite nicely into the next one, which is preventative versus reactive maintenance. Now, most facilities today run about 75 to 80% reactive. They're fixing problems only after they happen, or what they call fix on failure. But this approach risks catastrophic failures, long crop recovery times, and much higher costs. The goal should be the exact opposite, 75 to 80% preventative. And to give you a quick anecdote or example, we have seen this happen where a new operations manager came into a rather large facility that was about 80% reactive, 20% preventative. And in the course of less than a year, almost a year, they were able to completely flip that ratio to 75, 80% preventative, 20% reactive. And it resulted in just fewer issues and lower overall maintenance costs when you look at it on an annual basis. So spending a little bit quarterly, monthly, etc., to maintain and maybe do some minor repairs can actually save you more in the long run. So invest in preventive maintenance contracts, follow a strict maintenance schedule, and stay ahead of problems, not behind them. Lastly, the third one I wanted to touch on is called environmental stability score, or sometimes what I refer to in an indoor facility as adherence to set point. So these are CEA facilities, controlled environment agriculture. But in our experience, that term control can be somewhat of a fallacy when you dig into the data. Oftentimes, especially climate, is anything but controlled. And so how do you benchmark your room's performance? Or if you have multiple facilities, how do you compare across them? And that's what you can do with the environmental stability score. You're basically tracking how closely your actual room temperature, humidity, airflow, and CO2 follow your intended set points. The way I do it is I export the data from your climate computer, and then I calculate the average deviation or actual condition versus desired set point and create a score to benchmark the environmental performance. I'll usually do that per parameter and then do an aggregated control score for the entire room or facility. But this can be a powerful tool for identifying equipment problems, comparing rooms and their performance over time, benchmarking across facilities, as I mentioned, or just holding your system to a higher standard. Bryce, do you have any kind of, frankly, a lot of these, whether they're indoor or greenhouse, they translate pretty well between the two different environments and strategies.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in fact, I was thinking of two KPIs that are kind of the two sides of the same coin, which are exactly that, which would probably be precursors to your, you giving your climate consistency a score. So, for example, there's environmental uniformity index, and then there's environmental deviation index. And both of these are, you can't really use one without the other, and they're describing roughly the same sort of thing. But if you can imagine, the uniformity index is giving you a percentage, it's measured in a percentage of what the set point should be. How close are you to that in terms of the overall area of your production space? And then the deviation index is how far off. So one is like what percentage of your crop is not receiving those target conditions, and then the deviation is how far off is that. And those are, I mean, we take it back to the consistency of your climate is directly translatable to the consistency of your crop. And another thing, just to harp on the how everything, I mean, it's still relevant and everything sort of connects, is with the preventative maintenance. Oftentimes things break at the least opportune time. And the downtime incurred from that is, it's not just enough to say, oh, well, we had downtime and we're inefficient that we need to improve. Oftentimes it's helpful to quantify exactly what you've missed out on, what you've given up, what you've lost. So for an example, downtime adjusted yield impact is a KPI that references, it projects theoretically under ideal conditions what would be my yield out of this area had these setbacks not occurred, and is a quick way of you being able to, I mean, it's simple. I mean, you have those projections which come with some assumptions, and your downtime adjusted yield is the percentage of that. And so just an easy way of referencing how much these problems are costing us in terms of a tangible yield.
And real quick too, I just wanted to mention that even if you do everything perfectly on maintenance and uptime percentage, and the inevitable is going to happen. That's just part of life with these facilities. Like even over the weekend, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine's facility, they had a power outage that they knew was coming. They had backup generators. They were perfectly prepared. And they'd even tested that backup generator. And when it kicked on, something to do with one of the legs of the three-phase fried a bunch of LED drivers. Right? They did everything right. And then boom, they still had equipment failure on their backup generator. So, these are great goals, but there's always going to be a wrench in the gears. So that's why being so on top of this limits these things from happening, because inevitably something's going to happen.
Absolutely. Just to touch on the performance efficiencies here, given that energy is a main driver, if not like the main driver of a cost of production, and combine that with the inherent variables in energy consumption in a greenhouse. Anders, you mentioned at some point, you've done what you can labor efficiency wise or business metrics wise, and you have to start looking in through the lens of plant science to find the benefits. The same applies with your environmental efficiencies. If you take two greenhouse operators, one who's a savvy operator, the other who's a bit of a novice, that's enough. Like the skill level and the decision making on a daily basis is enough to make or break any business, and be the difference between having break even year or record profits years. And just like the turnover rate, it's all in the efficiencies in those in between things. If you overshoot or undershoot your targets, that's extra energy being burned that may not be coming back to you. So that touches on, a very important KPI that I feel is important for greenhouses is the climate or environmental maintenance efficiency. And to give you an example, well, often it's measured in kilowatts per meter square per square foot, or energy per area. But the idea is that in a greenhouse, again, there is not a constant energy demand. If you're, for example, thinking of temperature, the cost of servicing an area or maintaining a given temperature set point is going to be completely dependent on the light levels, the wind direction, temperature, the wind speed. All of these things are going to go into affecting how much energy do I need to burn to maintain this set point, and apply that to essentially any other climate variable. So the reason that's so important is that you may not always financially have the luxury of meeting your ideal set points. It might be that, oh, it costs too much energy to get there. It could be that our equipment is physically not able to get there. But it's a way for you, it gets you thinking about how do I quantify the investment of maintaining all of these ideal climate set points, and at what point do I need to consider making trade-offs in order to ensure profitability. Perhaps your crop grows more optimally under certain temperatures, but your efficiency isn't there. So yeah, that dovetails almost perfectly with another similar KPI called climate efficiency delta. And a climate efficiency delta is essentially a way of measuring specifically what did I gain from this extra energy put into this system. So again, temperature or light, they're very intuitive for you to understand this, but you're essentially taking the delta or the difference between the yields at these given set points. So for example, say you have, I'm Canadian, I use Celsius. So say you have a crop growing in 22 degrees Celsius and it yields you X amount, and you put in 300 kilowatts per meter into that area, and you want to compare that to, well, what if I have a 400 kilowatt per area? What are my yields there? And what were my it's a way for you to essentially you can look at it just through the efficiency of the two. What is the overall efficiency of the two systems? But it's also more meaningful to measure what is the exact gain of that extra 100 kilowatts. Really useful for understanding, okay, am I shooting for biomass here? Am I shooting to maximize my A-grade product? And depending on what market you're trying to service, those might influence how you use that type of KPI metric to optimize your efficiency.
I'm going to bring us
And
home here a little bit because we've got some really good questions in the Q&A. So if we can maybe jump to the next slide. Sorry to cut you off, Bryce.
no, please, thanks.
No, I've been enjoying it. We've been talking a lot about all this data, and I think what I've seen over the last decade plus is a lot of operators collecting all this data, and they're not really, they say they don't have time to analyze it. They have all this data stored, but they're not really doing much with it. And so if you have the ability to have an analyst on your team, fantastic, that's great. But not everyone has that ability to do that. So something that we've been implementing across facilities, and this is really good for any growers that are out there that maybe feel like they just have all the weight on their shoulders. It's a really good way to kind of unburden some of that. So we internally call it a cultivation optimization committee, and it's not just the grower, but it might also, think of this as like your data-driven brain trust. And this is a situation where no data analyst is really required. You can almost think about it like an internal roundtable, a cross-functional team that you put together. So typically it'll be maybe someone from the ownership or executive class so that they have, someone from the C-level team. It's usually your head cultivator. It might be someone in post-harvest as well. If you're working with consultants, you may have your consultants on your team. And essentially what we're doing is instead of relying on a dedicated data analyst, this group will meet regularly to review simple and trackable metrics. Could be labor hours per pound, yield by cultivar, things of that nature. And it helps us to guide to make smart decisions. And the goal really isn't perfection, because I don't know if that exists in cannabis, and hopefully it never does, because then we might all get bored. But it's really about progress. And so even basic tracking, when reviewed by the right minds, can lead to much better workflows, higher output, and fewer costly mistakes. So, having this opportunity to create a space for collaboration turns your experience and your data into a continuous improvement engine. No fancy dashboards or extra headcount required. And as a grower, what's kind of nice is you can start to make these data-driven decisions in unison as a team. And so it kind of just unburdens some of that weight that cultivators feel every day. And so on that note, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. I see there's some awesome questions in the Q&A. So Anders, I don't know if you want to lead us off on Q&A and grab the first one, and we'll jump right into it.
Sure. Okay. Luke Street, can you repeat the airflow velocities for indoor rooms at the canopy for both veg and flower? Yeah, so what I suggest is between 100 and 200 feet per minute across the canopy in veg, and 150 to 300 feet per minute in flower. And that number in flower increases or decreases based on what Bryce was telling you about light intensity being utilized at different times. So that airflow is going to increase with your light level and decrease accordingly. Let's see here. Michael, Kate had a question about indirect costs. It just says, what about indirect costs? I don't know if there's more to that, but you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. It really depends on, I guess, how your accounting is set up. So if you have gap accounting, it may be a little bit different, but traditionally people are looking at direct costs. 280E also throws in a whole bunch of monkey wrenches into things. So hopefully as time goes on, but unless it's directly associated with the operations to produce the product, most people are looking at just those direct costs. Indirect costs like marketing, advertising, some of those things aren't typically included in most people's COGS. Everyone does it slightly differently though. And I'm happy to, if you want to reach out offline, I guess that's worth mentioning as well. Anders, Bryce, and myself, we're all highly reachable. I think there's going to be a slide now maybe or shortly that has all of our contact information. So if you want to schedule some one-on-one time or group time with the three of us, that's something that we offer kind of free of charge. And so we're happy to kind of take a deeper dive. You know, these webinars, we're trying to get a lot of information out there without totally overwhelming you. And so, you know, we can only kind of go so deep, but just to let everybody know that's an option on the table for future.
Sure. Hey, Bryce, I got a good one from you, or for you, from Bud. I appreciate the light, temperature, and the associated science developed specifically to cannabis. In the case of greenhouse and indoor, why is there not more discussion of using biostimulants to decrease stress and increase plant health through management of plant nutrients and abiotic stress? Do you want to address that one, or really for the whole panel?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have, I'd love, collaborative feedback on that. I don't have the most direct answer to it. I think that like anything, my gut would say there's a few things. The learning curve in the cannabis industry is still evolving. There's standard best practices that were established in the legacy greenhouse world, 20 years ago that the cannabis world is still adapting or adopting to. And the specific studies, the plant science to understand exactly the factors that make the most impact. That's stuff that's still being developed and impeded by red tape and whatnot. Another thing, there are certain buzzwords that evoke a kind of negative reaction from people, growth regulators and things like that. And even when, not to say that those are what you were describing, you did a great job talking about abiotic stresses and, nutrients and things like that, similar to nutraceuticals for the human body. But there could be some sort of, Puritans out there that poses some reluctance to adopting those things. But I think in the long run, you're bang on, you're ahead of the curve that biohacking in the horticultural world is a new frontier.
I couldn't agree more. I would say that for many years in indoor facilities, we've taken a sterile approach where really no organics or beneficial bacteria are introduced into the system for fear of just pathogen risk and pest pressure. But more and more so now, as people are looking for ways to stand out with their product quality and specifically terpene percentages, we are seeing more and more people using biostimulants to try and primarily boost their terpene percentages, but also increase their shelf life. There's some anecdotal evidence that the addition of organics and biostimulants into a sterile system can help boost those kind of things. So I think you'll start hearing about it more and more. Andrew asked what device is used to measure leaf surface temperature. That's a pretty easy one. It's an infrared thermometer or infrared radiometer. There's a couple different flavors of it, essentially using infrared to measure the leaf surface temperature. One thing to note on those tools, it's important to get one with adjustable emissivity. So if you go buy an IR thermometer from Home Depot or Lowe's, those are actually calibrated for drywall, not leaf tissue, and you'll get an inaccurate reading. So I use one called the Fluke 62 Max. It has adjustable emissivity. It's a handheld device, but there are some more higher quality radiometers that you can integrate into your control platforms to get a broader range of measurements and 24/7 data logging. So that's what I would recommend there. Okay, let's see here. Are there examples of the calculations for different KPIs available? Yes, a lot of the ones mentioned, you can find those formulas online. If not, after this webinar finishes airing, we're going to be putting together a little ebook of all of these questions if we don't get to all of them, and we will try and include some of the calculations in that as well.
Yeah, and Jeff, like I said, we're happy to schedule some one-on-one time as well and kind of go into that a bit. I like Taylor's question because I see this one come up a lot, and sometimes people think of it as an or situation, and it can be an and situation. But Taylor's question is, if you had to recommend to someone thinking about a new build, which would you recommend, greenhouse or indoor grow? There's so many variable factors here that come into play. You know, are you in a subtropical area? Do you have, are you in a northern latitude? And so in some cases, I like to say both. If anyone's familiar with Colta over in Maryland, a really nice team out there, but on their premise, they have indoor, they have full outdoor, and it's not quite a greenhouse, it's a Cravo system, but it works off of shade systems. And they run a lot of that stuff seasonally up in the Maryland spot. So sometimes it's not should I go this way or that way? Sometimes it's budget dictated, and a lot of times it's experience dictated. You know, if you've been cultivating indoors for 15 years, you might not want to jump into your first greenhouse in a commercial setting. You know, if you're a greenhouse grower by trade and you've been working on tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers, well, then you probably want to stick with cucumbers. So some of that's budget dictated, but in some situations, depending on your license type and what the allowable country or local municipality or state allows, if you could have both, I would have both. Because they kind of serve different purposes. Some people really push seasonal greenhouse or year-round greenhouse, a lot of times for biomass purposes, for extraction and manufactured products. So I think before you make that decision, you have to kind of look at your budget, your experience, and then ask yourself, what are the products that I tend to produce? And then kind of work your way backwards from there. So I wouldn't say that one is better than the other. They operate differently, and it's important that you have the skill sets to complement those strategies.
Here's another good one too. Great answer, by the way, Michael. Apologies if I pronounce your name incorrectly. Thilo Savage asked, how do you calculate the square feet in grams per square foot, bench square foot, room square foot, etc.? Bench square footage is how we typically calculate that, which we refer to as canopy square footage. So the total surface area of all of your benches, grow benches in your space. I would say that's
I'm gonna put a little disclaimer on that too. If you're working in a state, that's how we define it, and I think most do as well. But if you're working in a state or a regulatory area, you really got to refer to your regulations, because each state, country, municipality, they may define canopy completely differently based off of a regulatory side. And I wish these folks all communicated together and learn from each other, but it's just not the case. Sometimes we see new states or new countries coming online, and they define things kind of in a slightly off or maybe even goofy way.
I
I
think we
like
have
that.
time for maybe one more. Bryce, if you see one you want to take, feel free.
Oh, sure. I saw Spike had a question here about shooting for full automation for data collection, or if you should spend labor dollars. So I think from raw data collection, there are so many tools out there. I wouldn't necessarily call it full automation, but there's no reason why a commercial growing facility shouldn't have a control system that is capable of capturing the vast majority of at least these climate variables. There's even systems that, like Priva, I remember from the green, like the tomato and pepper and veggie industry, all of their data tracking is logged through that. All of their packing data can be integrated, and they can follow quality control all the way through. So short answer being yes, I think you should embrace technology to capture that data, spend your labor dollars to verify, like go around with hand meters to verify these readings, to calibrate, and to really oversee and make sure that those tools are working correctly. But the beauty of having that all pulled into a central database is you can overlay everything. And like Anders was saying, like not only is that useful for efficiency, but just by looking at the data between this A zone and B zone, you get an insight on what's going on in these areas, and then prompt you to be able to investigate further.
And just to add to that a little bit, I think the goal looking forward should be to automate all this data collection, but there are limitations from a technology standpoint that prevent you from doing so. So I think my goal when I look at it is automate as much of the data collection as possible without sacrificing the accuracy of those measurements. And then for the other data points that you deem the most important that will impact your operation, make sure you have a plan to do it. If you just set someone free and go, hey, go check this, they can spend all day with some meter walking around a facility and waste a lot of hours. Make sure you have a very directed data capture method, whether that's a spreadsheet or some platform that you're entering the data in, that you're measuring it manually very consistently, and that device you're using is accurate and intended for the purpose. So have a plan, automate as much as you can, but for those manual data collection times, have a very concrete plan of how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, and is it worthwhile to do. I see a lot of people collecting a lot of data that they ultimately don't use to make a meaningful decision. So
on behalf of Pipp Horticulture and GGS Structures, we just want to thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to hopefully some one-on-one conversations with you in the near future. Noelle, thank you so much for having us. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you all, especially for taking the time to share all these insights with our audience. Always love to have you. Thanks to Pipp again for making this possible. And especially thank you to all of the attendees who took time out of the day to be here. And again, we'll be sending a recorded version of the webinar out to all attendees. And then our speakers have graciously offered to send out kind of a recap of all the questions and answers. So if your question wasn't answered, hopefully they'll get to that in their follow-up. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
thanks, everyone.